Welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast with Scott McKenzie. Scott is a passionate industry professional dedicated to transferring cutting-edge, industry-focused innovations and trends while highlighting the men and women who keep the world moving. So put on your hard hat, grab your work boots, and let's go.
Hi there once again. Welcome to Industrial Talk. Thank you very much for joining the #1 industrial-related podcast in the universe. Dedicated to you. Industrial professionals all around the world, because you're bold, brave, and you dare greatly. You're changing lives and you're changing the world. Thank you very much for what you do. We're going to have a quick intro because we've got to get right into the conversation with a gentleman by the name of Mike Bennett. Now, Mike Bennett is he is the technical director at OMG, and we're talking standards. We're talking about how important that is. We were talking also about trustworthiness and why it's important. And you have to just sort of sit there and say, thank you. Thank you to people like Mike. Thank you to the organizations like OMG, because, you know, without these trustworthy standards, life would be just a little bit different. And I think we take that for granted. So anyway, Mike's in the hot seat. And you'll see, if you're out on the video, you'll see it's in a hotel room. Cool. First time I've ever interviewed somebody in the hotel room. But it was well done, well deserved. He was great. And again, I just want to make sure you understand. People like Mike, organizations like OMG, IIC, Digital Twin, the consortiums, all of that stuff, it's imperative that we have these trustworthy standards, and there's this collection of very smart individuals passionate about getting it right. And I'm truly thankful, and you need to be thankful about that too as well. All right, let's get on with the conversation with Mike. Hey, Mike. Welcome to Industrial Talk. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yes, how are you?
Well, thank you very much for asking. Thank you very much. Now, listeners, once again, in my intro, you heard that we are at the Q1 meeting with OMG, and this is the first time this is the first time we've ever met.
That's right.
It is, huh? And this is Mike. He is the technical director, SDO, the Standards Development Organization. And that's what OMG is all about. Before we get into that there, Mike, give us a little background on who you are, just your quick little CV.
Right. I have a long CV, as you can probably guess. So I originally worked in industrial work in fire and gas and control systems and things, and got into a lot of the testing and quality assurance side of things. And then I moved across to finance about 20 odd years ago and got very involved in financial industry standards, and particularly trying to apply that same kind of quality assurance thinking and how you demonstrate that things are correct and so on. So I kind of came to software as a non-programmer, as it were, learning how to test and verify all manner of software and things. So then for years I got involved in the financial standards world. We have, as you can probably imagine, a lot of standards for interchange of data and for common models for financial instruments and all sorts of things. And I ended up creating a kind of, it's an industry resource that defines the meanings of the concepts in finance. If you want to know what is the difference between a mortgage-backed security and asset-backed security, and you want some formal definitions of these things, I basically created that through an industry association called the Enterprise Data Management Council, and we brought that to the Object Management Group to make it a standard. So that's how I got involved with the OMG. I ended up heading up the Finance Domain Task Force while piloting that ontology standard.
But it's more than finance, right? Now, with OMG, the Standards Development Organization, it's far more than that. It is, every time I have conversations with many in OMG, it's much more than that.
Oh, yes.
And it just never, I've never grown to appreciate the individuals and the organizations that develop these standards to try to create a common lexicon, some help. Can you sort of, with the listeners, be able to sort of give us an idea of what the Standards Development Organization, what do you guys do?
Yes, so from what I learned from finance, when we have very specific kind of things, is when you come to something like the OMG, we have two sides to the OMG as a whole. We've got what's called the platform and the domain side. So domain has these kind of common lexicons and common kinds of interfaces and stuff like that. We've got things for robotics and space and retail and all sorts of other things. Government, of course, for information sharing and so on. And then the platform stuff is, the OMG developed the Unified Modeling Language many years ago, and that's still very much a live and going concern. And we've built on top of that with various things like the system modeling standards and various other kinds of technology standards that are implemented by vendors in their technology platforms, as modeling tool vendors and so on. So we kind of balance those two sides of things, the domain and the platform. And sometimes you'll start with a domain thing, like say blockchain is a big thing right now. And
I wish I could understand it. Every time I have a conversation, I walk away.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, so for a while I headed up a special interest group on blockchain here at the OMG, and we were trying to figure that stuff out as well, and distinguishing between the technology and the cryptocurrency stuff. And there's some really good technology ideas there. And for that, although it started as a domain thing with like financial cryptocurrency and so on, it went to a platform group for making standards, because we're looking at standard kinds of interfaces and models and so on for how you basically use that kind of technology. So that's kind of a technology standard. So that's how we kind of balance the domain and technology side, and an idea might start somewhere, but it becomes something that needs to be a piece of middleware, or it needs to be a modeling language, or whatever it happens to be. So then we have a appropriate group for each of those kinds of things.
How do you, when you get to that point where you're having these, because we're here at Q1, and that's where all of the sort of the organizations, the consortiums, everybody sort of gets together and they start talking about the standards and all of the great stuff that's happening. How do you determine when a standard, when it's at a point where you can release it? Because it just seems like it never ends. It's just, there's got to be a point where, okay, here, and then we're going to continue to come out with a version 2 and version whatever it is. How do you guys determine that?
Yeah, so we have a process for managing later iterations of a standard. Again, depending on what you're standardizing. I mean, standards can be anything from which way round you turn a screw is a standard, but it's so long ago nobody had to publish it. But it could be simple stuff like that, which never needs to change.
I never thought it's clockwise versus counterclockwise.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody had to come up with that.
That's right. It's like, I love it when you watch some sci-fi thing, like one of these Star Trek kind of things, and people can come up to some completely alien thing and walk up with a little plug and plug it in, and you think, well, I'd like to be at the standards meeting where they figured out how that was going to work, because everybody just takes standards for granted,
I'm just without a doubt, it is taken for granted, and I'm not. I don't mean to walk on you, because I want to understand the process, but it's so true. I want standardized connectors, just so that they're standard anyway.
Yeah, and well, there's a meta standards process there, if you like, in that who standardizes the standardization. So with connectors, the European Union, for example, is going to mandate that out of all these USB, A, B, C, etc., all phones are going to have to use a particular one for a particular point. So there's a stage where you can choose between standards, or a regulatory authority can mandate that this is the standard you will use. Or in financial reporting, they'll say that when you send in a report for something, it needs to be in this XBRL standard, for example. And and go back to your question about the change management. So a standard has to be stable and not change in order to work. But at the same time, the world is always changing, so there's always new things coming through. So we have to lock in. And sometimes people think, I haven't heard about this standard for a long time, nothing's changed. Well, maybe that's because it's fine. Maybe that's because it's got everything you want. If you have a standard for how you issue unique identifiers for something, you probably don't want that to change. But then when you got, particularly domain verticals with lots of new content, some new kind of thing pops up. We mentioned blockchain just now, or other new financial models or something. Well, then you've got to have some process for evolution. So we have a continuous process of what we call revision task forces that take each stable version of the specification and identify what are the things that merit going into the next version of the standard. And we have a process. We have, we're here to make sure there's a level playing field. We have a process that ensures that everybody has a stake in a particular standard, has the ability and the right to be involved at the right point and have their say in what's going to go into the next version of that standard and so on. So there's a balloting process and all sorts of complex machinery behind the scenes that makes all that work.
This is a question. I said, how long have you been sort of involved in OMG? Just involved,
since about 2011 or 2012, I think. 2011, yeah.
And what's interesting about that is because of the changes, because of things that happen all the time, does your process also improve? Like your ability to evaluate whether it's a standard that's worthy of elevating or whatever it is. You guys have those. Have you seen that type of evolution in your process?
Yes. So my current role I'm relatively new at. So I was heading up these domain task forces and things. So I was kind of one of the members doing what we do and bending the rules if we needed to. And now I'm the gamekeeper rather than the poacher. So I'm here to enforce those rules. Yeah, we've been running a very stable process for a very long time. The underlying principles are very clear. We always make sure that there's a real market need for a standard, that we're not reinventing something that's already done. We always look out for there being some example implementation that tells us it's not going to be shelfware, for example. So we've got a process to ensure all that, and the principles are very solid. The process itself is very old and very solid, but it's always been under a process of continuous revision as well. So in the same way that with our standards, we make sure that all incremental changes are stable and well thought out and so on. So we have a task force that looks at, potential gaps and issues. There might be something that we've always done it a particular way, but what if somebody wanted to do something different? Or, if we want to make sure, for example, that when somebody submits a standard, that there's always the tool set that they use to produce all that stuff. What if they disappear? How are we going to keep that standard alive? So the process for that is very clear and well established, but there's new technologies being used that mean that the way we implement that may change. That's just one example that came across my desk literally this afternoon. So we're always looking at what are the things we may need to do to incrementally improve the process to meet current needs without losing the stability that we've built up over all the years that the OMG has been going.
Honestly, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. Given what OMG does, and all of the standards and all of the new or let's say domains that are taking place out there. Do you get a sense of there's a velocity? There's like a speed that's happening. Or has it always been very like, oh, what about like augmented reality, that's like all of a sudden, metaverse, all this whole new stuff, but it's still, even AI and having the guardrails around it. I mean, it's fast. I don't know how you guys do it.
Yeah. Well, AI is a good example, and particularly this ChatGPT, which it's using large language models, so it's using words rather than the meanings or concepts, and that's something that we can probably improve upon with, we have models for what we call ontologies, which is about the meaning of concepts rather than just words. So at the moment, those AI systems are, they're getting surprisingly good results because of having such a large corpus of material, but when they say something, it could look realistic and be completely wrong or completely right. And even when it's right, you don't know it's right.
How do you do that? How would you do that? Because you're absolutely right. I never thought of that with ChatGPT. All I know is like, give me a call to action, whatever the statement was, and it spit it out. Give me 5 options and spit it out.
Yeah.
But I never thought of that. How do you do that? How do you also take AI, this example, and create some the guardrails to protect against the moral implications of all that?
That's really important. And one of the things, so the OMG, we have a broader OMG ecosystem. So I mentioned earlier on that my position is with the SDO, the Standards Development Organization.
Yeah.
We've got a number of sister consortia. One of the most recent one is one called Responsible Computing. And that's one of the things I think where a lot of this AI type of issues are going to come through, along with other environmental type of issues as well. But those kind of guardrails. So those consortia don't set standards themselves, but they're one of many routes by which we get people come to us to say, well, here's something now that is well enough defined that we figure out there's something we can standardize. So I don't know what a standard would look like for that, but there's going to need to be standards around AI, around, well, a good example would be explainable AI. There are a few tools out there that allow you to do AI using what we call ontologies, so the formal definition of the meanings rather than just the words. Now, there isn't anywhere near as big a corpus of material for those things to work on, but there are tools that do that, so that gives you explainable AI. Now, somebody out there, some company reporting to their regulator might say, oh yeah, we've got explainable AI, the same way that there's people saying, oh yeah, we have ESG, environment, sustainability and governance. But as long as nobody's defined those three words, they can say what they like.
Yeah.
So how do you define that? So when somebody submits a report and says, yes, we're compliant with this explainable AI directive, we can prove that the outputs of our AI are meaningful and therefore either true or false, but not just meaningless. How do they say that if we haven't defined the terms first? So that's where you start to see potential for standards. It might be at a sort of domain level of the concepts, or it might be at the level of what process would an entity have to have gone through to demonstrate that anything that this AI will produce will be explainable, that it's linked to some industry ontology or some other resource for industry concept.
But again, I struggle with the speed. I mean, what you and others within the organization and the commitment and focus on developing those standards, that takes time.
Yes,
there's a lot of detail there. That's how the sausage is made. But then there's just this speed and this acceleration that happens, and it just seems like there's going to be a disconnect.
Yes. So, I've spent a bit of time the last few years in the blockchain space, for example, and it's a good example of where you
questions
have all these,
about that too.
Oh yeah,
it's right there.
Yeah. Technology's good. Stay away from the imaginary money, but there are some good offerings even in that space. But the technology has a lot of huge potential. As long as the people doing it don't get distracted by we're all going to get Lamborghinis and fly to the moon and all that nonsense that's going on. And so what I'm seeing there is probably a sort of extreme example of what we've seen in a lot of software development these days, which is what's known as agile. And to me, there's two things. There's agile, and then there's agile in air quotes, because a lot of people just use it as a word to not have any process at all. Whereas true agile process without the air quotes is every bit as rigorous as the kind of waterfall and other industrial processes that went before. I came out of hardware and electronics before I came anywhere near any software, and I brought all those disciplines with me from hardware into software, and it's doable. But a lot of the people use sort of agile in air quotes as an excuse not to follow any kind of rigor. But with a bit of imagination, with the right design of process, you can keep the rigor while allowing a more flexible and responsive and fast way of doing things than having to do one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing and having to do it all in a very procedural way. It's just a matter of imagination to have faster and flexible processes that don't compromise the integrity of what you're producing. The ability to demonstrate control at the end of it.
I don't know, man. Tiger by the tail on this thing, because there's a lot going on now. Back to blockchain.
Oh yes.
And I think myself, I believe blockchain, the word, gets a bad rap because it's always with crypto. But there's private blockchains. There's some value. There's some real great secure financial value in that.
There really is. There's a group in East Africa that's doing stuff on trade life cycles and trade management and stuff, for example. And the word we prefer to use for this is a thing called distributed ledger technology.
Yes.
Because it's about being able to post non-repudiable records of things. And there's people I know in academia who are records management experts who've really picked up on this, who are doing a lot of work in how that kind of DLT, distributed ledger system, can provide irrefutable records of things. You have a mortgage record or some deeds or some kind of contract you want to lock in or something. It provides a good way of ensuring that you have, that you know what you have and that you have what you say you have. So there's a lot of potential there.
With that said, okay, so there's a lot. I mean, is there a business case to be made for blockchain, like bottom line value? Like, yeah, it makes sense, because every time I have a conversation with something about blockchain, it's always like, yeah, this is great, and it does this, and I can see the record, and it's all great. But is there truly a value or a business case to be made for companies to implement things like that?
I think there'll be several distinct business cases. It's like all these things. If you start with the technology looking for a problem, then you're just going to be wasting people's time. But if you've got a problem that you didn't previously have a way of addressing quite so well, for example, in supply chain management or in energy supply and things like that, there's a lot of potential there for where you would say, okay, at this point in my process, I want a non-repudiable record of this state of the world at this point in time. Now, if you then supplement that with, again, stronger definitions of what all the terms mean, using formal logic, for example, instead of just words that people might change their mind about what they mean, it's very like law. You define your terms, and then you build up on that into other defined terms, and then everybody knows exactly what they're signing up for. So that's where the use cases are, and that's why I think, as I say, supply chain and energy and possibly real estate and a few other areas like that, where there'll be individual business models that people will see that can make use of this technology, and that can make use of standards that will need to be developed around that. For identity, for example, whether it's self-sovereign identity for you saying who you are, and being able to prove that you're the right age to drink, or you're able to drive a car or whatever in this state or that state without giving away lots of your personal information. So a lot of business models like that we're seeing both here and in Europe as well, that people are working on that.
And again, I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this. This is nothing to do with blockchain. It has everything to do with managing transactions, understanding where they're at, and being able to do it in a secure and open. I think there's a transparency that's there too as well. That's saying, okay,
that's right. Yes. So for
here's
example,
Mike. That's Mike. I know it's Mike because he's got whatever. It's Mike.
Exactly, and you can have so self-sovereign identity, proving who you are, proving what something is in the supply chain, or having, and again, transparency even in things like government and regulations and so on. If citizens in any country are able to see what the government is doing.
Do you have standards already out there for blockchain? Like, do they exist?
There's a de facto standards body, or sort of set of de facto standards coming out of the Ethereum Foundation. So they have these, what they call ERC, which are kind of similar to how the internet people, the W3C, have these sort of RFCs. It's a similar thing to that. So for smart contracts and for particular variations of smart contracts, they got a lot of standards on that. We've got an RFI out at the moment on smart contracts, and looking to find what areas there are that we could perhaps be doing more standardization on. We looked a couple of years ago at some identity related standards. Again, the W3C has the definitive standard for that, but there's a lot of business scenarios we're seeing coming out of a project in the European Union for being able to have self-sovereign identity particular to one particular context or another, so you get more flexibility in how you do that. Still potential for a standard in that. We don't actually have a vendor submitting that to us, so we're just going to have to monitor that for now. But there's a lot of potential for things that, for these new business models to work, there's going to be areas, whether it's at the level of an interface or the business definitions or the process, or there's various kinds of things you can standardize. And because of the way we work at the OMG, when we build a standard, we build on secure underlying platforms. So we have a meta modeling standard. When you have a modeling language like UML or SysML or something, they're all built on a common meta modeling standard. And so we're looking at, for other kinds of things that can be standardized, whether it's business meaning or process, or obviously with interfaces and stuff. We've got a lot of very strong stuff on that. We're looking to ensure that each standard that's built is built on a stable foundation of the right kind of building blocks that it's built up from, so it all fits into a coherent architectural framework.
I hated it. That sort of detail. We're here at the Q1.
Yeah.
And what's going to be your focus here at Q1? What makes Q1 a success for you? For OMG?
We've got A lot of things going on. We've got a big finance event on Thursday that's open, and it's virtual and in person. It's fairly US focused. We're an international standards body, of course, but this particular focus is the recently passed Financial Data Transparency Act, which explicitly calls out for standards, for specifically standards from voluntary consensus standards bodies, VCSBs, which is another acronym for what we are.
Right.
So we're bringing together a number of other standards bodies. There's, I mentioned XBRL earlier, for example. It's a very well-known, well-used reporting standard in the financial space, and showing how we interoperate with other standards groups, how we can help figure out the gaps in that space for standards, what other things are needed to put it all together. And that's the public-facing thing with panels and stuff, but we got the work to do to lead up to that. So on Tuesday and Wednesday, we've got finance and government coming together to work our way through all those reporting issues and stuff. So it's going to be fun. That's my focus for this week.
Yeah, see, it's heavy lifting. So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're saying, "Hey, I like what Mike's saying. I want to be involved. I want to contribute. I want to know more." What's your recommendation for helping that individual get the information they need?
Yeah, do get involved. Contact our membership people, or if you've got any questions about the stuff we talked about, you can contact me and give you my email if you like.
Yeah, you do.
That's
Bennett
at omg.org. It's Bennett with 2 N's and 2 T's. And just get involved. Be part of how the standards are made, so that you're on top of it and your tool set can support it, and we can play in the standards world.
You guys, you guys are truly the unsung heroes. You just take it for granted. I'm just telling you right now, listener.
If you're doing a job right, you should always be able to take it for granted. So,
yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's like those space opera things. If you can plug that thing into the alien ship and read their chip, then we've done our job.
All right, listeners, we're going to wrap it up on the other side. Thank you very much for joining Industrial Talk, and thank you once again for your support. We're going to have all the contact information for Mike out there, so fear not. You need to get involved. You need to get involved. Go out to omg.org or reach out to Mike, and guarantee you will not be disappointed. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
You're listening to the Industrial Talk Podcast Network.
All right, once again, thank you very much for joining Industrial Talk, and a hearty thank you to Mike for joining us on Industrial Talk at OMG Q1 meeting. That was a great event. Again, I'm always dazzled. You should be dazzled by individuals like Mike and other individuals that are engaged at OMG and all the consortiums that are developing trustworthy standards that we just take for granted. It's just happening behind the scenes because things work right. When they don't work right, that's when it becomes a challenge. But kudos to Mike. Reach out to him. It'll all be out on Industrial Talk, as you will, or you just know. His LinkedIn profile, the company, all of the stuff that you need to be engaged. Do it. At least begin to consume this information. All right, we're building a standard, an ecosystem that is dedicated to you. Industrial professionals, get engaged. Go out to industrialtalk.com and you meet people like Mike. Be bold, be brave, dare greatly. Hang out with Mike and OMG, and you will change the world. We're going to have another great conversation coming from this event shortly.